Good evening. First, I do want to thank the New York, the lawyers in the public interest, who have done just an amazing job of bringing this issue to public attention and building a broad-based coalition, of which NYCOSH is just one small part. But it is an important issue, and they deserve tremendous credit for doing so. It is a complex issue. And just by way of introduction, the New York Committee for Occupational Safety and Health is a very nonprofit coalition of 200 local unions in the New York metropolitan area. It has about 300 individual members of people who are rank and file workers, professional health and safety professionals, doctors, lawyers, and I've brought material on the side, which if you want to become a member, we'd be delighted to have you join us. The issue of PCBs in schools is both an environmental issue and an occupational health issue. And it shows in many ways how these two fields, which often go past each other, interrelate with one another. And as with many occupational safety and health issues and environmental issues, the whole regulatory framework in which we talk about chemicals and exposures is pretty much insufficient and irrelevant to dealing with the issues that working people face, and children's. They're not based in science for the most part, and are primarily driven by economic considerations. If you look at the history of the EPA regulations, you'll see that they have changed over the last several years. It is sort of like a moving target, which constantly is being rolled back and changed, and not changed based upon new evidence, but changed based upon the agency's perception of what the costs of removing and dealing with the threat is. So in 2005, when the EPA began to address PCB caulk in schools, the agency found, and I'm quoting here, the use of PCBs in caulking and sealant materials has never been authorized by the Environmental Protection Agency. In general, the placement of such materials predates the enactment of the Toxic Substances Control Act, and its use today is not authorized. Because it is illegal and the potential for exposure may be significant, PCB containing caulk must be removed upon discovery. That's 2005. In 2007, the EPA repeated its position on PCBs. The use, and again I quote, the use of PCBs in caulk is not an authorized use and thus in violation of TSCA, Section 6E. By 2009, the EPA began to retreat from its position on PCB-containing caulks, introducing PCB products which were excluded from regulation. Quote, caulk that contains PCBs at greater than 50 parts per million is not authorized for continued use and must be removed. So already they have moved from you can't use it to 50 parts per million and below is acceptable. Although they did go on to say that those caulks that contained PCBs in an intentional, as an intentional ingredient rather than inadvertently contaminated had to be removed. So they allowed PCB caulk containing material that was inadvertently contaminated below 50 parts per million. Then this year, the EPA held a hearing in which they wanted to eliminate or raise the level of that would be allowed above 50 parts per million. And the only reason that the EPA gave when they did so, held this hearing, was that they said that the use of PCBs in caulk may be widespread and may be an undue burden for schools. Not that they had any scientific evidence that it was safe or that public's health would be protected by raising the limit, but they were solely concerned with the cost of removal. We don't disagree that this is going to be an expensive process. It's going to be a very expensive product, but we don't think the decisions about health of children, teachers, and workers who remove caulk should be driven solely by economic factors rather than the public's health. As we read the record, there are currently no valid scientific reasons for weakening regulations dealing with the use of PCB products. At NYCOSH, our primary concern is with those workers who are exposed to PCBs. Like with the EPA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, which governs workers in the workplace and sets standards, the regulations are totally insufficient. In fact, there are no regulations that govern workplace safety and health exposure to PCBs. And this is true for many chemicals that workers work with. NIOSH, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, has recommended exposure limits, which are about double what the EPA allows for exposure for the rest of the population. But these guidelines are not enforceable. They are totally voluntary, and for the most part, it is our experience that they are ignored by employers. What we do know is that there is a growing literature about the hazards of occupational exposure, which has been discussed here earlier, to the disturbance of PCB caulks, and there's an association with an elevated, for those workers who do that work, there's an elevated blood serum level in the blood which grows. What we don't know, and I think that was also said, is what levels of PCBs in the blood cause disease. So what do we do in this situation, where we have a certain amount of scientific uncertainty? Well, we believe that this is a situation in which we have the precautionary principle takes place, is appropriate, and that worker protection is appropriate and necessary. It is workers in these situations, we believe, who have the greatest risk of exposure. And by protecting workers, by eliminating or reducing PCB contaminants in the indoor environment, we think that is the most effective way to mitigate other human and environmental exposures. We believe that there are certain similarities as well as dissimilarities to the way in which asbestos is controlled in schools under the Asbestos Hazard Emergency Response Act, called the HERA. First and foremost, you have to identify where the material exists and catalog its condition. Second, you need to monitor the material. Third, you need a deliberate and orderly program of removal. And you need to do this in a transparent manner involving teachers, workers, and their unions. Thank you.